This is my first Shabbat back, officially, in 38 weeks. So in October, we read about a journey of 38 years to reach the promised land. Here I am. And in many ways, it does feel like promises fulfilled. It's wonderful to share Shabbat morning with so many people with whom I have shared so many Shabbat mornings and so much life over 30 years together. It's a joy to see you and to share a vibrant Shabbat in which the Bima is filled with a forthcoming simcha of an ufruf and participants of all different backgrounds. It's a joy to return to a vibrant community. The prophets are my focus this morning, in that we have in front of us a very powerful Haftorah. It's the third of a series, the 3 Haftorot from the 17th of Tammuz, which marked the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem, until the destruction of Jerusalem on the 9th of Av. For each of these weeks, today being the third, the rabbis chose Haftorot that castigate the people. And the question is, why do we seem to always blame ourselves? Look at the words on page 1000. They're reminiscent of the words of Yom Kippur, when we also read the prophet Yeshayahu. But it's true, as you'll see in a moment, for the whole motif of what is the nature of prophecy. These are the very first words, chapter 1, verse 1, of the prophet Yeshayahu, who will be the longest in terms of years of any of the prophets. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. And now God speaks as a parent. I reared children and brought them up, and they have rebelled against me. An ox knows its owner, an ass its master's crib. Israel does not know. My people takes no thought. Ah, sinful nation, people laden with iniquity, brood of evildoers, depraved children, they have forgotten the Lord, spurned the Holy One of Israel, turned their backs on him. So the first thing we have is a prophet speaking first on behalf of God. But the tone is that of sadness. God is the parent, and nothing makes a parent happier than children who are doing well, who live with integrity. And nothing is more painful, so God says, than children who lack integrity. And that's what he puts his finger on. He puts his finger on the fact that the people seem to be nice to God, but not to other people. They are hypocrites. Verse 10. Hear the word of the Lord, you chieftain of Sodom. Now he's calling the leadership of Israel Sodom. Sodom being depraved. Give ear to our God's instructions, you folk of Gomorrah, the harshest possible condemnation of Israel. What need have I of all your sacrifices, says the Lord? I am sated with burnt offerings of rams and suet of fatlings and blood of bulls, and I have no delight in lambs and he-goats, that you come to appear before me. So the people are doing their rituals. They're even being generous with their offerings to God. Top of 1002. Who asked that of you? Trample my courts no more. Bringing oblations is futile. Incense is offensive to me. New moon and Sabbath proclaiming of solemnities, assemblies of iniquity, I cannot abide. Your new moons and fixed seasons fill me with loathing. Strong stuff. They are become a burden to me. I cannot endure them. And when you lift up your hands, I will turn my eyes away from you. Though you pray at length, I will not listen. Your hands are stained with crime. Wash yourselves clean. Put your evil doings away from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Do yourselves to justice. Aid the wronged. Uphold the rights of the orphan. Defend the cause of the widow. We have a very unusual religious literature because it's a literature of a people. But it's not a tribe, though there's an element of extended family. The reason the Jewish people have endured is because there has been a moral underpinning that defines what God sees as our relationship. It's not about what we do for God and the gifts we bring into the sanctuary. That's important. It's not that God does not want flowers, but ultimately a relationship in which there is infidelity, God says, is a relationship in which the flowers brought are an insult because they're not sincere. Because God as parent, the first part, says that what I want from you is taking care of my children with fairness, all my children, for I am the creator of heaven and earth. Abraham Joshua Heschel is one of our most stirring teachers of the 20th century. We know him for the courageous stance he took against the war in Vietnam at a time in which it was not popular to do so. And we know him for the time in which he marched with Reverend Martin Luther King in Selma, in which most other rabbis told him, don't do it, because we got to get along. We are a minority in this country, and you're making trouble. You're making trouble by protesting a war that you say is unjust. You're making trouble by taking on how things are done. And he protested, but that was in the 60s. Already in the 30s, he earned a doctorate. Yet in Berlin, a young man from Warsaw who went to Berlin to study philosophy. And he wrote his doctoral dissertation on a theme called the prophets that would later become this book. This book was published in 1955, and its inscription is to the martyrs of 1940 to 45. And Heschel, again, writing long before he took to the streets, and in fact, again, drawing on material he wrote as the evil was brewing before him in Germany, writes as follows: what manner of man is the prophet? The things that horrify the prophets are even now daily occurrences all over the world. Indeed, the sorts of crimes and even the amount of delinquency that fill the prophets of Israel with dismay do not go beyond that which we regard as normal, as typical ingredients of social dynamics. To us, a single act of injustice, cheating in business, exploitation of the poor, is slight. To the prophets, a disaster. To us, injustice is injurious to the welfare of the people. To the prophets, it is a death blow to existence. To us, an episode. To them, a catastrophe, a threat to the world. And Heschel will comment on our Haftorah of this morning as follows. Second. Significantly, the speech that opens the book of Isaiah and which sets the tone for all the utterances by this prophet deals not with the anger, but with the sorrow of God. The prophet pleads with us to understand the plight of a father whom his children have abandoned. The prophet laments in his own words the children's desertion of their father. But the sympathy for God's injured love overwhelms his whole being. What he feels about the size of God's sorrow and the enormous scandal of man's desertion of God is expressed in 2 lines quoted above, which introduce God's lamentation. God's patience and long-suffering are exhausted. Man has become a burden and a sorrow for God. The question that I posed in introducing that I would be speaking on the Parsha, or on the Haftorah, is why do we always blame ourselves? Why do we allow the prophets to blame us? And it troubles me. Tonight, in honor of Tisha B'Av, our service is at 8 o'clock. I'll talk about spending last week before the Arch of Titus, in which there is a celebration for the defeat of the Judeans. And something I didn't know until this visit is that the Colosseum that stands just to the side of the Arch of Titus, there's now a public sign describing the history of the Colosseum, the stadium of brutality, of bloodshedding, that sat 40 to 50,000 people. The sign says that the Colosseum was built with the spoils of Judea. It's not a Jewish sign, it's a historical marker. I never considered that Jerusalem was that wealthy, that Jews were that successful back then that they could build what would become such a monument to Rome's power. And so tonight I'll talk about that defeat of Judea and what it means and what the Arch of Titus means. But the question is, why do we blame ourselves? After all, Rome, under the time of Vespasian and the time of Titus, was the most mighty nation in the world, and the Judeans were revolting. Under Hadrian later, when the Jews again revolted under Bar Kokhba, it's clear why the Jews were defeated. Bar Kokhba was so small, Hadrian was so powerful. But more and more I appreciate that the power of what the prophets say is that we are responsible. What I have seen repeatedly, and have seen it in my travels, and have seen it without needing to travel, is that there are some who choose a mindset of victimhood. The victimhood says, my problems aren't my fault. They're the fault of people stronger than me. I was minding my own business when I got slammed. But the whole thrust of prophecy is to say 2 things, 3 things. 1, you're not victims. You are actors in history, and you are responsible. And when you act unjustly to those who are weak, God, the parent, which is the second idea, does not take kindly to it. For woven into creation itself is morality. And when you act immorally as a people, you will pay a price. It may take time, but when you suffer, don't blame anybody else. God sent, we will read tonight, Nebuchadnezzar, the Assyrian ruler, the Babylonian, to destroy Jerusalem because the Israelites were immoral in how they behaved. The rabbis of the Talmud will say that in the first temple, people were immoral by worshiping idols, and the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, how they treated each other without a sense of seeing in each other a need to act morally. And so what I gain from why we take it is because there's a very powerful lesson, and that is responsibility, grounded in the word response. and that it matters, that responsibility matters. And the last. So I read again. Alas, she, Jerusalem. And this is what we'll read tonight in the book of Eicha. She has become a zonah, a faithless person. The faithful city that was filled with justice where righteousness dwelt is now filled with murderers. Your silver has turned to dross. Your wine is cut with water, so that what appears to be worth more is, in fact, by those who sell it, worth far less than it's presented as. Your rulers are rogues and cronies of thieves, everyone avid for presents and greedy for gifts. Do not judge the case of the orphan, and the widow's cause never reaches those rulers. Assuredly, this is the declaration of the sovereign, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel. Ah, I will get satisfaction from my foes. I will wreak vengeance on my enemies. I will turn my hand against you and smelt your dross as with lye, and remove all your slag. I will restore your magistrates as of old, and your counselors as of yore. After that you shall be called Ir HaTzedek, Kiryat Ne'emanah, a city of righteousness, faithful city. Zion b'mishpat tipadeh, Zion, you shall be saved through judgment. V'shafeha b'tzedakah, her repentant ones, through the doing of right. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, when we read your words that come across thousands of years, may we read them as speaking to us in our time too. For as Abraham Joshua Heschel taught, what so upset the prophets for many is simply how society works. The strong get to feel their power, and the weak, they are to fend for themselves. But the words of the prophets across generations say that God is the parent of all, and that when those who are weak are left to suffer, God feels the pain. May we feel God's pain in all that we do and more. May we feel God's sorrow and God's hope, and may we live with that hope for a better world. Amen.